I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional lands of the Gadigal from the Eora Nation and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. My name's Dan Stock and I'm the Senior Communications Manager for Mr. Yum, and it's a real pleasure to be here today and joined on this panel by three of the smartest marketing brains in the business who are going to help us unpack our topic, building better brands that bond. To my right here, we've got Gerald Torto from global design agency RE, Victoria Tulloch, head of marketing at Archie Rose, and Nathan Lennon from Hawke's Brewing company. That's the one. Please make our panel welcome. To get us started, given our topic, I'm going to throw to you, G, with a simple question, but a pretty important one, which is, why does design matter?
You said it was a simple question. Why does design matter? That's a trap for me to get really deep and philosophical. Design matters because basically we're impacted by everything that we see, everything that we hear, touch, anything that affects or stimulates our senses. And I think we can very much notice when something isn't designed well. It grates, it doesn't make sense, it's not instinctive, and it just irritates and frustrates. And so design is really about thinking about the end user, the experience that you want to create, the impact, the thing that you want that person to think, feel, or do in a particular situation. And because we're all so different and we're coming at a particular situation or scenario from, wherever we may be or whatever mindset we're in, design is really thinking about how do I, dare I say, manipulate the situation to make you feel or to make you do something that I want that brand to communicate. And so design is really important because you're thinking about the end user and you want them to end up doing something, you want them to feel something. And in the context of brand, that feeling and that doing is attributed back to what you stand for and who you're about. And so a simple example is if the experience sucks, that reflects badly on the brand. If the experience is good, it reflects a kind of mediocre thing for the brand. If the experience is amazing, exceptional, then, the brain starts to go, who's behind that? What do they do? And give me some more. So design is, especially for me, as being someone who works in the design agency, is absolutely important. But I would say that.
Tori, you have been with Archie Rose since day dot and seen it as a brand evolve over the 12 or so years that it's been around, and now oversee a marketing department of 12 people who are charged with building the Archie Rose story. How has that story evolved over that time?
Yeah, well, it's actually only been 8 years, which is worth mentioning just because it feels like it, has been a sort of brand that's been, we've set out with an intention of creating a brand of legacy and, hopefully we're doing a good job of that. I think we are in a really lovely transition at the moment from being sort of, a smaller craft Australian brand to really now being able to chart our path as one of Australia's great premium brands and rolling that out around the world. So I guess, you referenced that there's 12 people in my team. There was only 3, 18 months ago. So, there's massive changes underway, and it does mean that you've got to sort of really go back to drawing on what are the things that are going to keep the brand, itself and authentic and have all the right roots. And we always sort of go back to our values, which are innovation and quality and education and authenticity. And, we continue to go really deep on that to help guide us moving forward. So there has, there's been lots of growth and change, but I think, the upcoming years will be where, we really kind of get to test that properly in the full headwinds of growing from being like a smaller brand to, really a much larger brand, which is exciting.
Very exciting indeed. And we will come back to delving into some of those themes of authenticity. But mainly what we will be talking about today is the broader idea of storytelling, and storytelling as part of a brand. And Nathan, I know you've told the story of Hawke's Brewing countless times, but I'm sure there are people here today who would love to hear about the inception of the idea and bring the idea to life.
Okay, great. Again. Well, it's actually, when we started, and we certainly didn't have a marketing budget to put behind anything, it was a pretty valuable tool, at least, in the genesis of Hawke's. But so the background, and I'll try and make this. So there's a 10-minute version, and then there's the one I'm going to say. So this all started when I was working in agency land at an agency in New York called Droga 5, and it's my dream job. I was working over there with my creative partner, now co-founder, Dave Gibson. And for anyone that's, I guess, lived and worked overseas for an extended period of time, you get caught by these moments, particularly if you're an Australian and it's cold where you are and it's hot back home, where a pang of, I guess, homesickness will just kind of hit you out of nowhere. For me, I just actually had a holiday back home, so I was like post-holiday blues, feeling a bit down. Why are we here? This doesn't matter. What's ambition? Like, let's just go back home and be on the beach kind of vibe. And Dave was probably just trying to ignore me, do the work. And I shot Dave a question that, obviously looking back on it now, is the one that sort of changed our lives. And it was, mate, if you could be back home right now having a beer with anybody in the world, like, who would it be? And he turned to me and he said, oh, mate, I'd love to have a beer with Bob Hawke. And I was like, mate, that's a great answer. And I've always wanted to have a beer with Bob Hawke, and we grew up in the 80s, children of the 80s, and we're sort of like, why did we both pick an 85-year-old politician as the one person that we want to have a beer with, particularly in this day and age? And we got to chatting about Bob, but I think, and all the amazing things that we knew about him, and what a special person he was to actually have some kind of impact on us as children who had no interest in politics when we were 7 or 8 years old. But ultimately that led to also, I suppose, like a bit of a nostalgic conversation about our childhood. So it became really potent and powerful. And I think in the background, little marketing brains might have been kind of like churning over, and eventually we sort of landed on this interesting thought of, what if Bob Hawke was, I suppose, the figurehead or the face of a beer brand in Australia that wasn't a joke or a flash in the pan or about the fact that he liked sculling beers at the cricket, but actually stood for something and stood for his legacy, but also maybe sort of tries to evoke this feeling that I just had in the office when I sort of really missed Australia. And what is it about this country, that we love? And essentially shot an email over to Bob, well, actually to Blanche, because Bob didn't know how to use a computer, through a friend. And Bob got back with a bit of a maybe. Have to go and meet the boys. Would they be willing to fly back to Sydney, present, which we took as a yes. Walked into David Droga's office 2 weeks later and quit our jobs. Told him that Bob Hawke, and we were going to set up a beer company with Bob Hawke. He's already signed. It's like completely lied. But we had to do it now, right? Like, we threw it out to the universe. And then, next thing, a few months later, we're sitting in his kitchen and we're in blazers and he's in his pajamas pretty much. And halfway through the pitch, pretty much just after the page in which we were like, this is a brand about legacy and purpose, and it needs to be a brand that gives back to the country that we love, which he really loved. He stopped us and he just said, boys, this is all really good. This sort of makes sense. You guys seem to know what you're talking about. But I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to give me an honest answer and don't bullshit me, were his words. Why is this going to work? And I don't know, like you go in a meeting sometimes and you've got like a list of grenade questions that could come your way, and like, I'm going to be a lawyer about this. I'm going to have a smart answer for everything. It's like that we did not have an answer for. Dave froze, and I just said, Mr. Hawke, with all due respect, this has got to work, because not only have we already quit our jobs, we've actually already told our boss you've said yes. And he laughed. And Dave's looking at me just with that, you've just blown the whole thing. And Bob said, well, I'd be a bum if I said no then, wouldn't I? And that was his blessing. And then beyond that, he also was when he, on the spot, said, I don't want any commercial gain out of this. I know the way the economics of business works. Whatever you are going to give me, I want to pass on to support Landcare Australia for the environment as part of our endorsement agreement. And as long as you promise to, to look after that, we're all good. And yeah, that was kind of how it all began. Sorry, that was nearly a 10-minute version.
Thank you. Obviously, Bob Hawke helps Hawke's Brewing come with so many key pillars of its brand that Nathan touched upon. But how do you help companies define and understand what their brand is, what they should or do stand for? How do you uncover that from a business, and what's that exploratory process?
Yeah, really good question. I think the key thing is humility being a really important trait, because whilst we as an agency and we as individuals, be our strategists, designers, whatever, copywriters, especially if you've been in the industry for a few years, you almost kind of go, yep, you're this type of business, you want to do X, you're that type of business, you want to do Y. But it's about putting those preconceived ideas to one side and just talking to the individual, be that the founders, be that their teams. And it's, I don't want to bore you with a whole kind of process of how we do a project and all of the phases. But I guess that the first part is what you might class as the boring word due diligence, but another word for it is immersion. We need to understand what this business is about. How do the teams function together? The founders, did they work together before? What's their story? How do they connect with each other? What's the culture from what we can tell and observe outside? What's the story of their journey and growth and all of those things? We're really trying to get to the heart and soul of not the stuff, the prepared answers that you might have as a lawyer, but really when those answers aren't there, what's going on? And more often than not, once we kind of make them feel comfortable with us and that there's a sense of trust, you'll hear something. It will be a phrase, it will be a sentence, it might even be a word if you're lucky, and that just unlocks everything. It's like, right, that's what you're about. And then we start to almost kind of just build and tell a story that's anchored around that almost central brand idea. But it's asking the right questions, it's making the individuals feel comfortable to talk, and it's really just absorbing and listening and learning. And then once we do that, once we've crafted that story, then we start to think about how do we bring this story to life in all the various places that this brand is going to show. So hopefully I haven't given away any trade secrets or anything, but no, it's pretty standard, really.
Thank you. Nathan, before you walked into David Droger's office and quit, you were charged with bringing global brands' stories to life. And now you're been doing that with your own brand over the past 5 years. How different has it been working on bringing your own story to life? And I know you've got a great storyteller in Bob Hawke, but how different has it been working on your own baby?
Immensely different because, firstly, we're at the centre of it. But also, we came from a world where there's years and decades of structure, systems and processes and resource around everything that we were doing when we were working at Droger. Not to mention just a lot of people that were smarter than us. but also working with companies and brands that had been around for 10, 15 centuries. So for us, it was not just about, I guess, building the brand from the ground up. We had to build a business from the ground up, not knowing anything. I was just saying to Tori before, like, before we started Hawke's, I didn't know what P&L stood for, you know, so pretty green. So I think it's, and you ask any founder that goes into something is probably as green as what David and I were. And I suppose you're in this sink or swim mentality, and you've also got the legacy of somebody like Bob Hawke hanging over the top of you, and you feel this immense sense of responsibility. So I guess the short answer is an immense sense of pressure. It was, but I think what we did know from the outset is, and it hasn't changed since day one, was why we were doing this. And for us, it was never about building a brand about Bob Hawke. It was about creating a connection between our brand and an audience or a community that we were looking to build, that we genuinely felt the same way as us, genuinely felt that could have just as easily have been working overseas and had that feeling, and just as easily caught on to, I suppose, the concept of something like this that wasn't like a conceived idea out of nowhere. We weren't sort of tapping away looking for something. It just came in a really authentic way. So I think having that and being on the inside of that and having that visceral feeling that sort of catalyzed that conversation that led to us starting the business is what we have. We'd never had that building other people's brands, you know, like we were never as invested in a really personal way. And I never like really worked on a brand that like hit me in the heart. You sort of have to try and articulate a way to make that happen for people, but this started that way.
Was that the reason you were not worried about people thinking, as you said earlier, just it wasn't about building a brand that just whacked Bob's face on a can? It was more about what you were trying to create, what he stood for in a community. But were you worried when people just saw his face on a can? It was Hawke's Brewing and there's like a fly-by-night funny little thing and off it goes. Like, how worried were you that would be how it was perceived, not
I think
what
that's
you were...
I honestly think that's how it was perceived. I think when we came along, people probably thought it was a gimmick, or there were rumours going around that we were owned by Lion already, Lion Nathan, and this was some kind of summer promotion beer idea. And we knew that from the outset. It's like, how do we dismantle this perception that we feel is probably out there, even with our peers, you know, that this isn't a flash in the pan. So it was really important that we could articulate early on the story and I suppose be able to, you know, always understand that it's underpinned by that moment that Bob chose Landcare Australia, which I think is a bit of a penny drop moment in terms of, like, we always wanted this to be a purpose-driven brand that gave back to charity, but the fact that he sort of tied the bow on that part of the story to give us the substance, you know, that this was a legacy, not just for him, but something that we wanted to take forward ourselves and feel that it was part of our own legacy, and the people that work at Hawke's can feel a bit of ownership of that as well. But with no budget, no media budget, like, you know, it's just, you just got to grind away until over time people start to, you know, they start to hear it enough and start to see it around enough, and then you get to tell your story enough, like I am now. And then eventually with a bit of that longevity, it sinks in.
Yeah. Thank you. Tori, 8 years ago, the Australian craft distilling scene was vastly different. You were a handful of gins and now there are hundreds. How do you continue to stand out in an ever increasingly crowded marketplace?
Yeah, look, I think there's so many answers to that question, so I'll try and sort of drill down on a few. I mean, I think, having a really clear vision around your purpose and your values is fundamental. I think if you don't have that, it's easy to kind of flap in the wind and sort of, make a bit of traction, but then, things stall. So our founder, Will Edwards, has always, he's had very, very clear vision from day one, but also as a business, and all the people within the business were very clear on the values that guide us and what we're trying to do. And then as you sort of step down the layers, I mean, it sort of relates then to things like sort of brand and product hierarchy. So, we have layers to our product hierarchy that sees, us produce, I guess, what we call our sort of core range always on products that you see on, back bars like this one, but then, goes down into layers that for us are around, small batch limited edition things, or our tailored spirits range, which allows us to sort of customize things on a daily basis. And then also sort of building events and experiences into the brand from day one, which I've sort of come from a brand marketing background myself, and so then coming to Archie Rose. And Will had this vision of, not a vision, it was sort of just made sense to him that if you're going to make spirits, that you give people an opportunity to be able to sort of very transparently not only understand how you do that. If you've been to our venue in Rosebery, you'll know that, the distillery is behind a cage, and then, the bar's 3 meters across the way, so you can kind of see what we're doing, and then you can taste, what we're making, but also then, because Archie Rose was born out of a frustration from him not being able to make spirits sort of legally or, quickly in Sydney, then actually giving people the opportunity to do, make their own 2 bottles, or, blend your own gin classes that we do. And all that sort of stuff just means that, we've been able to kind of continue to just build the brand, not only as products on shelf, but as a, sort of an immersive experiential brand that, that sort of draws people to you. So it's the mix of all those things, really. Yeah.
We've been slowly, quietly rolling out our new brand at Mr. Yum, which you'll all see today in the merch and the light bulbs and what have you. And we're super excited. I think tomorrow we are actually pressing go and launching for real. But I'm wondering if, given that this was very much your work, whether you could just talk us through some of what this new branding is, what are some of the insights that you gleaned from us as a company, and how that translates into this new branding.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I think one of the key things for us was really trying to understand a story that had already been penned or written, so to speak. So, there was a lot of kind of pre-work before the work started, which was understanding the business, understanding the journey. Kim sitting right there, and she featured on a lot of podcasts talking about the journey of the business. So it was very much a case of getting the team across your world, understanding the journey from the beginning, and then once we started to really get our hands on the brand and understand what you had to play with, it became really apparent that there is an energy and a vibrancy about this organization that wasn't necessarily reflected in the brand. And when you spend time with people, I think, these 2 smart individuals sitting next to me have spoken about individuals and people and the values that they've got. Not everyone is privy to what is happening behind closed doors. And so what your brand does is it does that story for you. So one of the key things that, we as a team identified is that there is so much personality and energy in this organization. How do we inject that into the brand so that even if it's the first time that you see Mr. Yum, you're like, whoa, this is something cool and interesting. And so that was one of the things. So, by its very nature, we look at the name Mr. Yum and we start to think about, well, if Mr. Yum is a character, how does this character move? And is that the right way for us to go? Can we inject personality through eyes by making it almost like a character, but it's not a human, but it can move, it has personality, it has these behavioral traits. And then, there's all of the kind of creative stuff, but then we've also got to look at the business. So where does the business want to go? Where does the business live? Who are the customers that are using Mr. Yum? What are the products and services that Mr. Yum is already made, but also in development? Where are the markets that this is, going to end up being? And from a kind of purely creative perspective, you can see so much potential, but then there's also the grounding it down into the reality of, if you've got a really cool bar where Mr. Yum is going to feature, but then you've got a more kind of corporate hospitality space, this brand needs to have the flexibility to feel right in both those situations. From a human perspective, the experience is different, but the quality of Mr. Yum and Mr. Yum's ability to sit there and it feel right there is what was uppermost in our mind. So we started to think about tiers and layers, all of the places where the brand will show up, the countless activations, the whole experience as a customer. What do you see? How do you interact with it? And how do you show someone who's not got a QR code in front of them what Mr. Yum is about? So do we show a phone or do we show the UI? And so the team, and I'll probably be doing a really awful job of this, that some of the talented team are here, so please chat to them. But a lot of due diligence and lots of different ways in, will this work, pressure testing it, seeing it in the wild, and then getting feedback and responding to that feedback and, continuous iteration is definitely the key. But I think there was this one moment where it was effectively, look, if we drill Mr. Yum down, it's about tech, yes, humans, absolutely, and food. And when you bring those three things together, it's better together, right? Those are at its very core, the three ingredients. So how do we use those three ingredients and bring it to life, like accentuate that personality, that energy, that vibrancy? So as you can see on some of the bits there, I think the team at Mr. Yum will forgive me for saying that the brand was relatively basic in its format. And what we started to do was think about, well, how do we build a system for that? And how do we build so that what we wanted to give the team was effectively a kit of parts that didn't just mean that they had to resort to just slapping the logo on everything. But the typeface choice that we made was an indication of it being in the digital world. So you'll see that some of them are pixelated and others aren't. Some of the icons, the color choice, all of it to just give it life and elevate it so that even from a glance, you look at that and you go, that's a company that's got energy about it. That's something that I'm interested in. Hopefully the team feel that way. So yeah.
Talking about cool bars that Mr. Yum is featuring in, Nathan, bringing the Hawke's leisure centre to life. It's an amazing venue. We were there last night. I was saying it was just packed all afternoon, Sunday night, just heaving with families, multi-generational tables, all enjoying beer and retro Chinese food. How important was the leisure centre to your vision of bringing the brand to life and adding that experiential element to it?
Yeah, I mean, it was critical, and it was a long time coming for us. For those that don't know our journey, because it was just David and I and our pocket money essentially, and neither of us were brewers. We started this out of a garage in my nan's place in Coogee in 2017, and we knew that the journey was to get to a point where we could convince enough people with money to give us that money so we could eventually build a brewery and make our beer, step one, to provide a bit of legitimacy and to get a bit of control over our product. But then within that, an opportunity to also create I suppose, at the time, a taproom experience. And in those very early days, I couldn't stop telling everyone about Archie Rose as a benchmark for how I came to even learn about that particular brand was through people talking about the Rosebrew venue. So I knew how important that was or what an opportunity that was to absolutely nail that. And we were fortunate enough to get, after a couple of years, looking a really incredible site in Marrickville that allowed us to put together our brewery, but also leave enough space left over for us to do something really special. And I think from a commercial point of view, we're sort of on the hook too as well, because, you know, it's 2,100 square metre warehouse. So I think that's when it was like, right, we're not just building a tap room here. We're building a total expression of what it is that we felt started this whole thing. And our brief to our project team at the very, very beginning, the very first time we met, was, we can show you a whole bunch of pictures, and we can talk to this, but we want to explain to you just what it was that we felt back there in New York at that time during that conversation. And the task at hand right now is, how do we surface that for our guests when they walk in? How do we create that moment of familiarity, nostalgia, something that hits you in the heart? No, you don't even need to kind of get it, you just feel it. And I think being able to, I guess, achieve that and see the interaction that people have at Hawke's is exactly what we wanted the master brand to be able to achieve it as well. So I think, you know, the challenge for us is, how do we bottle a little bit of that experiential sort of magic, or whatever it is that we've been lucky enough to achieve through the venue, and have that infuse its way through the remainder of the brand. So if you're sitting in Perth and you're interacting with the brand in some way, you sort of get it the same way as if you were actually at the venue as well. So that's going to take time. But I think that's the experience at the Bob Hawke Beer and Leisure Centre and the Lucky Prawn is kind of how we want you to feel when you're interacting with our brand.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Tori, obviously everyone's been holding up the consumer aspect of Archie Rose and being such a pioneer in that field, and the consumer aspect of the brand is obviously so front of mind. And you're doing amazing collaborations. You bring lots of different people in on the Archie Rose journey. How do you go about creating those collaborations, and then also being a little bit in charge of those activations when they're off-site? Like next year, I think you've got the Sticky Beat Festival, which looks amazing. But how does that come together?
Look, I think like brand-wise and business-wise, we've all just sort of, you know, the original, you know, people that have been at Archie Rose, and there's two of them here for sort of, you know, the last 5 to 8 years. We kind of just like collaborating with other brands. We're also kind of small, right? Like we were just starting out, and so that was sort of part of what we were doing anyway, as being a sort of, you know, brand starting up in Sydney and wanting to sort of, you know, work with other producers or Sydney brands, and then coming back to the sort of product hierarchy, you know, which is then sort of in a more tactical sense, if I put on my marketing hat, like the power of collaborations is just new audiences, right? And so if you can find brands that, you know, very authentically are a great match, and you can then creatively, you know, create stuff together that like really, really feels amazing in terms of stretching the brand, you've then got the added benefit of just like opening a new audience and being able to, you know, sort of cross share what you're doing with each other's audiences. And so we have collaboration and collaborative products built into our product hierarchy, and we've produced sort of 4 sort of more formal collaborative products since day one. Originally our Horasumi gins, which we did in terms of a Japanese tattoo style, and then the Sydney Opera House gins, and then a collab with Gelato Messina, and then one with St. Ali, the coffee roasters in Melbourne. So those 4, you know, are just like bloody awesome, you know, people and brands that it's just been amazing to work with. But then probably collaboration has then, you know, because we are a venue in Sydney, and, you know, we like supporting other venues and we like their support as well. And so Sticky Beak's sort of grown out of that, and also just grown out of the depths of, you know, 2 years of, you know, like venues like ours not being able to sort of do the stuff we love. And so, so, I mean, I think we do collaborations because we joyously love them, but also then if then for the marketing team, it's like got this added benefit of just being a really amazing way to authentically bring new people into your brand, which is great.
Fantastic, thank you. We're talking so much about connections and connecting people and building an audience of people who care. But how should brands start to think about building that community? How can they be a bit more strategic about building an audience that cares about a product?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I'm no founder, and I've not really ever built anything, to be honest. But I think Business 101 is find a problem, and then build a solution, and make sure that problem is problematic enough that people will want a solution to it. You make a solution, and then you want to make that solution a really great experience. And then I think the way that the world has moved is that there are so many businesses starting. Sometimes you'll have multiple businesses trying to attack the same problem. And so we're in a world now, transparency and kind of we're all on social media, and we can all kind of find out the values and the purpose of an organization. It's no longer enough to just build a solution to a problem that people have. You've got to have this value add, and that's where brand can play a role. So in terms of building a community, it's very much about how do I feel when I use that brand and that product? What does it say about me? What does it communicate to others? What do I want my association with that brand to communicate to other people? And so you're having to think about, yes, the product that we've created to solve a solution that you have, or to solve a problem that you have. But beyond that, what does the brand stand for? Is the brand filled with people that look at its customers and just see dollar signs? Or do they go, look, we love what you do and we love what we do. How do we take this to the next level? I think what's really interesting in listening to the stories is brands that can extend beyond the core product to add value to an extended audience are the brands that can build a really strong community. I might not be buying or using your service every day, but if I see that you're partnering with someone here, or I see that someone in your organization has written this article, or I see that you as a business have a policy for your workers that shows that you're a really great employer, you can build communities without even realizing it. Just because someone has said on Twitter or on socials, said, I love the fact that my organization has this policy for mothers or people with children or whatever. And so you can build community. Oftentimes we think about, our community is all of our followers. How many followers have we got? What's the foot traffic? Community is filled with people who are thinking about your brand, seeing your brand in different ways and going, I know what they do. And I love the fact that they're doing that. I may not have bought anything from them in the last 6 months, but when I do need to buy something from them, that's where I'm going. So I think the way that we view community needs to evolve and change, and it is by its very nature. But this is where the power of brand and, as has been mentioned, story is really, really critical. If people can identify with your story and they have the permission to continue their own story as part of your narrative, then you get really, really tight communities.
Fantastic. Nathan, the land care partnership, as you've mentioned, it was a precondition of Bob's involvement in your brewery. What would you have added a charity angle to the brand had that not been his wishes, and what type of advice would you have for other businesses and brands who are looking to form a charity partnership to their business?
Where was I? Yeah, so it actually was in the deck. I think because it came from the truth of we'd worked on a lot of purpose-driven business at Droga 5, and that was the work that actually made us feel like, that we were making an impact outside of our own industry. Because I think, like all industries, the advertising industry can look very inward sometimes, and we can shower each other with awards. But does it actually have any resonance outside of that circle? So the work that we really loved working on had that, that ability, I suppose, to actually reach real people, to have an impact, to create genuine conversations. And I think that was part of the reason why we put that part of the purpose, or why we built purpose into Hawke's, along with the fact that we just love our country. And what an opportunity to approach a Prime Minister that did so much for our country and say to him, not exactly you're going to die soon, but this is a business that and a brand that we see becoming an iconic brand within the Australian landscape, and it's a legacy. So the opportunity here is, how can we build this and find a way to give back to the country we love, just like you did, because it all fell really out of the values that he embodied. So that's why it existed in terms of the why. And Bob was just smart enough to identify immediately that the biggest issues that's facing us is climate. And he really loved the simplicity of, we're all not going to go and chain ourselves to trees tomorrow. We're all got busy lives, and there's only so much that we can or are willing to do. But if it's as easy as going to a bottle shop and choosing a product that gives a little bit back, well, all you have to do is just do something you already love doing, then the harmony of that works. So I guess that's just sort of how the construct of the partnership started, and in terms of the conversation we were having with Bob. And then I suppose my advice to anybody that was looking to, I suppose, follow the same path of associating with the charity, it's just be really honest with yourself about why you're doing it. Make it feel authentic to the heart of who you are as a business and a brand, and also don't get in over your head around. You have a business to run, and the commercial realities, particularly of a startup business, are fierce, and you have to ensure that you're able to keep your head above water. So be very honest with yourself about what it is that you can give back. But have goals and take people on the journey of, what that's going to look like. So you don't get caught in that in the environmental instance. You become a greenwasher. Just be very real, be very transparent. And I think with that level of authenticity, you do start to create community, because people appreciate that level of honesty. You're doing good, but at the same time, you're not a bullshit artist.
We are almost getting close to out of time, but a couple more questions that I'd like to tick off with you. Tori, Archie Rose, there's a great content arm to the brand. How important is that content and creating that in building your community?
Yeah, look, it's super vital, actually. We have our content, original content person, Harriet, who's our head of hospitality here. She also just happens to be amazing at content. And it's kind of been like this secret weapon, to be honest, where I think we were lucky to have, Harriet and the team and probably a team then that was pretty focused on, how valuable content can be. So that's sort of the, higher level answer. I mean, to get kind of down to a sort of a more nitty gritty, I mean, without content and without really good content that you're then using to tell your story via the range of different channels you have to tell your story, you just can't do it in a way that is going to help you grow. So that's kind of it. I mean, we shoot now 2 to 4 times a month. We actually have sort of set up a studio out at our new distillery at Banks Meadow. We used to shoot at Rosebery. Can't stress enough how you just got to do it. And I mean, I was chatting to Harriet about this before, because I got your pre-questions. like, you know, even just like figuring out, like we did, someone in the team that, you know, is just really up for it and kind of willing to give it a go. Like that's sort of the starter, right? And I mean, she's here, so you could ask her some questions afterwards. But like, you know, literally kind of just figure out, you know, like you need good photographer, and then you need someone that's just willing to give some stuff a go and, you know, use some sort of interesting props and backgrounds. Moving through that, though, I think if you really seriously are looking to kind of grow your brand or your venue, you do need to get quite focused on how you actually, you know, create really engaging content and do it really regularly. And, you know, then find the channels to make sure that you're kind of sharing it the right way, because it's basically it's like your little marketing engine, really. So without it, you're sort of just not reaching the right audiences. You're not able to kind of bring them in to the brand.
Any, just quickly, any missteps along the way that you just sort of think, oh, can't believe we did that?
I think we're going through an interesting sort of inflection point, probably in terms of social media. You know, the rise of TikTok, which, let's face it, you know, is probably like literally the most significant new, well, social or entertainment company as it may be. And so, you know, we were probably, you know, also because of COVID, and it did sort of give us restrictions around, you know, being able to shoot as regularly as we did. And, you know, and also with TikTok, as you may know, as an alcohol company, we're not allowed to, you know, sort of advertise on TikTok. So it probably means that like video investment is something that when you're thinking about marketing now, you know, and it's kind of a pain in the ass that it's like another thing you've got to do. Like now we do, you know, shoots 2 to 4 times a month. It used to just be still shoots, and then we do a little bit of video. Now we have to ensure that we've built video into every single shoot. And so, so we haven't so much taken a misstep on that, but it's something that we've had to like sit down and think, okay, we're going to have to figure out more time to do this, you know, other team members to do this, videographers to do this. So that's sort of the reality, really.
If anyone in the room here is sort of thinking now, looking at the amazing Mr. Yum rebrand and thinking, oh, we need to get some of that. What are some of the ideas, or what are some of the questions people should ask of an agency before they engage them?
What's G's number and can I call him? I'm kidding. Kind of not kidding. I think, one of the questions that is really important to ask is, when I look at my brand and when I ask other people to look at my brand, what's their first impression? If they know the product, okay, cool. But those who don't, what's it saying to them? I think the interesting thing about Mr. Yum and a lot of other businesses that we've started to recently work with is there's normally this kind of tipping point where you've raised a particular amount of money, or you've hit a certain kind of point where there is awareness about you, and you know the products and the services catching fire, and you look at your brand and then you look at your organization and the people that you've hired, and you're like, there's a misstep here. Like, the culture and the team has grown and there's an energy and a vibrancy, but our brand doesn't reflect that. So I think if there is a misstep between what your brand is communicating about you and what you are as an organization, then that's a really good point to think about that. I think the second thing as well is, you mentioned channels like video and TikTok and things like that. More and more what we're seeing is this brand needs to show up in different places. And typically when you first kind of have your brand just to get going, you're really only thinking about your core assets. Maybe it's on packaging, maybe it's on this, and stick a logo here and good to go and we'll run with it. And then you've got a million and other things to kind of focus on. But you'll soon start to realize and soon see that our brand works, let's say for argument's sake, on print. But in digital, there just doesn't seem to be that alignment. It just doesn't work. So that's another good point to really kind of think about. Look, is our brand holding us back, or is it propelling us forward? And that's not to say that you want to be changing your brand consistently. You don't want to be doing that, but you want to be able to get to a point where you're like, now is a really good time for us to look at this, and then really put the pressure on your agency or the team that you've chosen to help you with this, to give you runway to express and to play with it. So again, as I mentioned, some of the team are here. One of the key things for them was uppermost in their mind isn't just, here's all the things, just use that. Here's all the things as almost a base plate. And we cannot wait to see what they do with the brand going forward in 3 years' time, 5 years' time. Still at its core what we've built, but they've evolved it. And it's still got the essence that at its core, that what's at the story. But they're finding new ways to tell it. So, but yeah, call me.
Finally, Nathan, you're talking about building a legacy brand. You're only just starting really on doing that 5 years in. But what does the next 24 months look like for Hawke's Brewing?
Look, I think for us, the biggest milestone, I suppose, that's been in our vision for the last 5 or so years has just been ticked in terms of the leisure centre and the brewery. I felt it was always the plan that whilst we were, I guess, a Sydney-born business for no other reason really than we had to be close to Bob when we set everything up. Like, we could have set this up anywhere, to be honest, Canberra, Melbourne, whatever. I guess the acknowledgement in just that we always had a vision to take this to become a national brand. We've really been patient in holding that back until we've actually got control of our own production and essentially have the venue. So that's created the foundation for us now to start rolling out into some of those other states. And the next 24 months is really about moving up and down the eastern seaboard and really entering those markets properly with a good team and a real HQ behind us. So that's going to be the focus. People keep asking us, are we going to do more leisure centres? And it's like, we'd love to, but ultimately it's really about kind of expanding outside of the province where we were born, because I think particularly in craft beer, it's so often about your provenance and so often about your tight-knit community, and we love being in Marrickville. There's really no better community to be in if you're a craft brewer. But our ambitions are, to stretch outside of that and try and create relevance in different markets. So that's the challenge ahead for us.
Wish you all the best with that. We can't wait to see a Hawke's Brewery in Victoria sooner rather than later. But there's been a terrifically insightful and valuable conversation with the three of you. Please join me in thanking G, Tori and Nathan for